Jeremy, welcome to the show, my friend. How are you?
Just being boring over here in Missouri in the States.
Oh, come on now. It's not that boring, is it? Just sitting at
I'm
home?
just hanging out, working from home is what it is.
Yes, living the dream, my friend. Any
Living-
day that ends in Y, you got to be moving. That's for sure.
That's right, man. Thanks for having me on the show.
Always a pleasure. Pleasure's all mine. As you know, this show is all about increasing sales knowledge. I mean, not just for the seller, but for both sides of the buyer-seller relationships. And you know how much that plays a part, especially in today's world of sales.
Sure.
But before we dive into in-depth conversation as we normally do when we have conversations, do you mind sharing with some of the listeners how you came about developing all the sales knowledge you developed today?
Well, I could probably spend about 10 hours going over that. So maybe I'll give you the brief version. What I can do is I can give you maybe a little bit of my background, because my background relates to really, I would say, what is necessary if your listeners want to take their sales to the next level. Would that help?
That would help
Okay.
completely. Please.
So, I'll be brief on this. So I got into sales 17 years ago. I was a broke college student, and I got my first job selling door to door. I was selling home security systems. If any of you listening have ever sold door to door, you know what I mean. Company hired pretty much everybody that applied because it was straight commission. We're talking about 20, 21-year-old kids. They took us out into a van, gave us a script, dropped us off in the middle of a neighborhood, a not so safe neighborhood, and basically said, hey, go make some sales. We'll pick you up when it's dark. And that was my introduction to selling. And at that point, I really thought that selling was going to be easy because that's what the recruiter told me. Right. So I went out there. Imagine this little kid, right? So I went out there. I started talking to my prospects about the features and the benefits of the product and how it's going to help them and do all this stuff for them. But I was stunned because I started getting all these objections. And I was like, it's not supposed to go this way. Like, nobody told me about this. Like, they would say like, we can't afford it, or we don't need it, or your price is too high, or let me talk to my spouse. I need to think it over. Can you call me back in a week, a month, a year later? And I finally got to the point after about, probably 6-7 weeks of nonstop rejection and really hardly making any sales, that I got to a point where I was like, maybe selling just wasn't for me. Have you ever felt that way yourself?
Completely. When I very first got started, it was very similar to you, but it wasn't door to door. It was phone sales.
Yeah.
They gave me a script. I think there was about 6 or 7 different scripts.
Yeah.
And they gave me the product knowledge sheet, and they called it Slicks back in the day. I don't know if they still have it for all the products and services. And all I was doing was very similar to what you were doing. It was leading with the features and benefits rather than focusing on how can I break through and have a real conversation. It's a human element has to come into play.
Sure.
You got to understand it's another person just like you that puts their pants on a similar way than you do every morning and just have a normal conversation. So I try to use a lot of the things that I use every day. Yeah. It's just having a conversation, leading with a one-liner and just trying to get them to laugh and loosen up a little bit.
Sure. Yeah. And I remember the time that this really hit me, but as I was struggling, this was probably 7-8 weeks later, I'd barely made any sales. It was straight commission. And I remember this is very vivid for me. Like, I remember sitting on a curb late at night for my friend who was a sales rep to pick me up. Wow. And I remember I had worked like 12 hours that day. I had made 0 sales, so 0 money. That whole week I had made 0 sales, so 0 money. I was newly married at that point. I had my daughter, Cammie, was maybe 6-7 months old. And I was to the point, like, we're not going to have enough money to pay rent, in 2 or 3 weeks from now. And I still remember like the sweat, like it was so hot and humid in the summer, the sweat like rolling down my chest and my legs, like just aching and stuff. Cause I'd walked all over day, like knocking doors. And I, at that point I felt, I would say, emotionally broken. And I was like, to the point, like, I need to do something else. And when my friend picked me up, this is kind of something that really changed my life, looking back at it. And at the time, I didn't think it had a big impact. But now, several years later, I'm just like, wow, that like saved my sales career.
Wow.
But I got into his car and he popped in a Tony Robbins CD, if you know the personal development guru, Tony, right?
Who doesn't, right?
Yeah, exactly. And Tony said something like this, and I might be butchering it, but he said, most people fail for the simple reason they don't learn the right skills necessary to succeed. They don't learn the right skills. And he goes on to say that everybody's taught skills. Everybody's taught skills, right? Every salesperson's taught some skills. But he said that people that fail are the ones that were not taught the right ones. And at that point, it was like a light bulb went off in my head that maybe, just maybe what the company was training me and what I was learning from what I now call the old sales gurus, because they had me read all these old sales books, maybe they just weren't the right skills. Maybe they were outdated and just really didn't work anymore. So at that point, like I committed to my family that I was going to have to learn the right skills. And that's really where my sales journey started, if that answers your question.
That answers it completely and gives a lot more information about it in a bigger picture. And it's funny that you are able to go into your memory and pick out the very small little details on how you felt with the emotional side of it, of being newly married, 6-7-month-old daughter, sitting on a curb making zero money. When you were sitting on that curb, right? When you were sitting on that curb, did you imagine the type of level of success you would achieve in your career?
Never would have imagined it. I was like a little schoolboy. I was like a lamb being led to the slaughter because I didn't know the right skills. Like I didn't know, and I look back and I'm so fortunate. My degree in college was behavioral science and human psychology. So I was learning those type of things while I was learning like traditional selling. And, we'll get into that as you probably ask me some more questions, but I'm grateful to God in my mind that he allowed me to have that opportunity to be able to learn those skills, because if he hadn't, and if I hadn't done something about it, I wouldn't be here with you on this call for sure.
Right. And I appreciate everything you just said to all the listeners. I'm sure they got a lot of value from that. I'm sure that everybody has a similar, significant pivotal moment in their career that shifted their life in a positive way, sometimes in a negative way. Would you say that that's the most significant pivotal moment for you in your sales career?
It was the most significant pivotal moment right there. Right then and there, I had to make a decision to go out and find the right skills, because here's the deal. I was being taught like sales skills. It wasn't like they weren't teaching us skills or having us read books, So I was being taught these traditional skills from the company and all the gurus. And I would notice that some of them would work when I used them, and I would make a few sales. But I also noticed a lot of their techniques didn't work at all. And when I used them, I would actually lose more sales than if I had not used them. And at that time, I remember I was reading a book by Robert Kiyosaki, the Rich Dad, Poor Dad series. Like my friend was making money in real estate, and he's like, you got to read this book about being in real estate. I'm like, okay, I'm 21. Like, what does a 21-year-old kid know? And it talked about becoming a millionaire. And I'm like, well, I don't know anything about real estate, but how do I become a millionaire as a salesperson? This is literally like when I first started thinking about this. Like, how can I be a salesperson working for a company and make $1 million a year? And that was my whole thing. But after a little while of studying all these traditional sales trainers, I started to ask myself probably a more intelligent question. And I thought, if these sales gurus know all this stuff and they're so great at selling, how come none of them were making 7 figures a year as a salesperson in their jobs before they started a company and became a so-called sales guru? Like, how was I ever going to get to that level of income as a salesperson if all the sales training I was getting were from people who were never able to get to that level themselves? Like, how could they teach me those skills if they never got there? Do you see what I mean? Exactly. And that started like making my mind think like, maybe I shouldn't be learning all these things from these gurus.
And the main thing with these gurus and the people that I looked up to over the years, and we share similar views, and we have a very similar parallels in our lives that's led us to what we do today. It comes from, effort, dedication, passion.
Yeah.
Everyone knows their passion. They're just lying to themselves if they don't, and what actually drives you, and figuring out what works for you may not work for someone else. But the old techniques and the old gurus, sometimes when you're reading some of these books, it does something different to a younger salesperson, because they think, okay, this person's did it for 30 years and done it very successfully, but they can't do it today, Jeremy.
Yeah.
And that actually leads me to the next question I wanted to ask you for the listeners is, recently you asked me to be a guest on your podcast show, Closers or Losers. Thank you, by the way. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Right.
Love the name. The main thing I wanted to ask you with it is that what led you to your success in understanding their old techniques and a new model of selling and developing all the success you've had? Congratulations with all the business stuff.
Sure.
And Closers or Losers. Talk to me a little bit about that podcast show.
Well, yeah, it's, I had to come up with a name that was kind of, I don't want to say controversial, but well, basically, yeah.
It is. Yeah, I like it.
Because everybody's like, I'm a closer, I'm a salesperson, I'm a closer. But here's the deal. Every company that I worked for when I was a W-2 or 1099 salesperson I would come into, they would always say, the salespeople would be like, we're closers and we're so great. And I would make 10, 20 times more money than they would. And I never called myself a closer. I looked at myself as more of a problem finder and problem solver. Like, I'm there to solve these people's problems that I was selling to. And so here's the deal. If it's not to means the show is not about, hey, if you're selling, you're making sales, you're a loser. Obviously not, right? If you're not making sales, you're a loser. But if you're still using old school selling techniques, old school closing techniques from the dinosaur ages of selling, when we have a completely new buyer, a completely new consumer in our day and age than we did even 10 years ago, you are losing sales that you could be making for yourself, your family, your company, and really setting yourself up for financial freedom for generations to come. So that's what the whole show is about interviewing. We interview top sales trainers like yourself that our methodologies align with each other, that I feel are really getting results out there in the market for clients, salespeople, and companies. And we interview salespeople that have gone through our training as well, that make at least $350,000 a year in commissions as a salesperson, because we want our listeners to not just get pumped up and excited, because that wears off. We want our listeners to actually have skill sets, to know the right questions, to be able to go out and have results. Because to me, that's why I started a training company, was to get people results, not just to pump them up and make them excited, and that wears off in 3 days. It
does. And the motivation only gets you so far. It's just like a fuse, a flame. It's going to deteriorate over time and wear off. So what are you going to do when you're spending 10 to 12 hours on the phone trying to break through someone's emotional baggage?
Yeah.
And or emotional barriers. Sure. What are you going to do during those times? How are you going to push forward?
Well, you're not if you don't have the right skills. If you don't have the right questions to ask, if you don't know how to listen, if you don't know exactly what to say and how to ask and how to pause and tonality, well, you're dead in 2020.
Completely. Using your pauses is something that I train on a lot. Yeah. A lot of salespeople don't like awkward silences.
Yeah.
And they get caught up into that and they feel like they should be saying something.
Right.
I use my pauses for effect, because I'm looking for an answer. And sometimes when they don't answer, Jeremy, I say, don't worry, I'll wait. Because I want them to respond.
Pausing causes tension and in a good way, good tension. It's not bad tension where they're resisting you, but it causes them tension where they have to really think.
Absolutely.
What the problems they have are doing to them. And it makes them really become emotional. That
leads into the next question. I'm sorry if I talked over you a little bit, but the communication breakdown that I very often see in sales, and when conversation moves from easy to difficult because they don't want that tension on a phone call or, that type of uncomfortableness when they can't overcome because they don't have the emotional intelligence to be able to deal with it when they do open up that can of worms.
Sure.
When they try to use the old techniques, the hard selling approach, would you say that that's the reason why communication breaks down as much in sales?
Well, let me give you an example. Let me, I always do this with different companies. There's three eras of selling. Okay,
Mhm.
if your listeners want to write this down. So you've got error number one, and I actually wrote down some of these notes so I wouldn't forget for your listeners. In error one, selling, because you've got three different types of salespeople, different errors of them learning, and you have three different types of consumers, and we have to match this. So in error one, that was all about like, you're talking about sales training from like the 60s, 70s, 80s, where it was mainly boiler room selling. You're
Mhm.
talking about Wolf on Wall Street, manipulate them, posture them. You're the authority figure, be aggressive, always be closing, being really excited about what you sell, be pumped up when you're talking to them, and somehow they're going to be excited about your product or service too. That's error one. Now, error two, came out probably in the late 80s, 90s, and they call that consultative selling, books
Mhm.
by Spin Selling, if you've ever read that. And that's where you were taught how to, hey, you need to ask questions. Wow, it's revolutionary. You need to ask questions to find out the needs of the client, logical based questions to find out the needs. Like Mr. Prospect, some questions from that era would be like, what are 2 or 3 problems you're having? Or, what keeps you up late at night? I mean, everybody asks that question. It's so
Right.
old school, right? So, but they're logical based questions. And when you ask logical based questions, what type of answers do your prospects answer with? Logical based
Right.
answers. And do
Zero
people
emotion to it. Zero.
rely on logic or emotion,
Mhm.
right? So it's still more persuasive than error number one, but you're still having to play the numbers game because very little emotion is brought out by logical based questions. And now we're in error three, okay? And we're the most persuasive when we allow others to persuade themselves.
Right.
That's called dialogue. We call it neuro-emotional persuasion questions. And the question is, how do you do that? Can you just show up and say, hey, John, persuade yourself and, write out the check in my name? No, you have to learn specific skilled questions, when and how to ask them in your conversations
Mhm.
that get your prospect to sell themselves, to pull
Absolutely.
you in rather than you selling them. But here's the key. If you're still selling an error one and error two techniques, well, you're selling to error three consumers. Do you see
Mhm.
the conflict there? If you're still
Yes,
using
huge.
techniques from error one and error two, but all consumers are in error three being consumers, there's going to be a disconnect there. And that's why so many companies, they have to play the numbers game. They have to spend so much money on marketing. Their conversions are so low
Mhm.
because they haven't adapted their sales techniques to today's consumer. And that's why so many salespeople and companies, they might be here, but they literally could be here if they started learning error three sales techniques.
I was
100%.
always learning. I mean, we've talked about that on numerous of phone calls that we've had in meetings. The more that you take an effort to learn more each day and try to improve in some type of way, Jeremy, I try to improve 1% every day,
Me too.
every day, every single day. I don't stop. And the main thing when you're learning every day, you're consuming new information and putting it against everything you already know.
Mhm.
And you're trying to figure out, how can I cultivate the right approach to break through to the right listener
Yep.
or the right buyer?
Mhm.
Because it's not about the products or service or t-shirts or popsicles. It's never about that. What it's always about is figuring out, okay, how can I tie the emotion to the logic so they can justify it to make the right decision?
Right.
And that's powerful if
Yeah.
you get the right type of skill set, and focusing on that skill set
Yeah.
is very difficult to hone in on because
Mm.
a lot of people aren't going to take the time and effort to do it.
Sure.
I mean,
It, yeah, it
right.
does take time. It takes effort. And to answer, kind of finish that answering that question, because that was kind of a long response. But, if you really think about it, because all of this has changed, 20 plus years ago, what was the bridge between the company and the consumer? It was, of course, the salesperson.
Absolutely.
Right? Because, they would have to go out and they'd have to educate the public, and the public expected to be educated. So company would send out the rep, educate the public about their products or services. And really, besides radio, TV, maybe newspaper, that was the way the consumer learned about what you're offering. But in our day, with, technology, ease of the internet, especially social media, we're
Goodness,
just in
yes.
a different age, right? We call that
Yep.
the information age buyer. So the consumers know all about your company, your products or services, your pricing, who your competitors are, how long you've been in business. They know everything about you by simply doing a Google search, even on their phone. And because of that newfound power, they'll no longer be manipulated or pressured by pushy, aggressive salespeople because they know they have many choices to choose the exact product or service you sell.
Right. A lot of people, they fail because they talk about themselves. I was just recently talking to someone, I can't remember who it was. I think it was another sales trainer. And they brought up to my attention, they were like, listen, when my salespeople are having problems because they keep talking about themselves, they don't give a shit who you are. They don't care. They already know the name of your company and they know everything you're about. What they're looking for is a connection, or looking for an expert to tell them what to do, how they should go about making that system or product or service work out for them.
Yeah.
That's what they're looking for. So when you have someone, and a lot of salespeople, they have an objection, or they'll go, me too. They'll try to agree too much with a buyer. Yeah. I'm like, I went through something similar, Jeremy, and I know exactly how you feel. No, this is how you develop being an expert.
Yeah.
Is you talk about, Jeremy, I had someone that I helped years ago with a very similar issue. Sure. Would you like to learn how I helped them?
Yeah. 100%. Yeah. Nobody cares about you. Like I love the salespeople that have the presentations, and they have the picture of the corporate office, and here's our corporate office, and here's a picture of my family. Like, nobody cares.
Yeah, no one cares.
All they care about is, can you solve their problems and get results? If they feel like you can, they're going to go with you. They don't care about anything else.
They don't care. I mean, that would probably support some of the information and the knowledge out there today of why people are learning so much about EQ, emotional intelligence, and how much science plays into today's world. I mean, how much do you feel EQ and science plays into both sides of the buyer-seller relationships?
Well, I mean, science. So, okay. So I'm a behavioral scientist, right?
Yes.
So, that's what I went to college for, human psychology. I never actually graduated. I dropped out my senior year. I was making too much money.
Who knew? Who knew?
I was 22, right? But science, when I was in behavioral science, I learned that people made decisions, about what to do, what to buy, anything based on certain triggers in their mind, in their brain. Mm-hmm. Okay. So I'm like, okay, how do I take that and interject that into sales? And that's really what I did. That's where I came up with NEPQ, we'll talk about. But we have to understand that every prospect you talk to has problems and challenges buried in their subconscious mind. Okay. Mm-hmm. No matter what you sell, it doesn't matter what it is. There's feelings they have from the past, conditioning, like it's all buried back there. Okay. Your questioning ability can help them uncover those problems, take those problems from their subconscious to their conscious mind. When those problems come from their subconscious to their subconscious, their dreams, their goals, ambitions, like that they buried because they don't think they can accomplish that. When they come to their subconscious, it now makes it urgent for them to take action in their mind. Yes. So it goes from just a little problem like, oh, maybe we'll look at that later or get back to me later, to a massive problem that they have to solve right now. Only your questioning ability can actually get that from their subconscious to their conscious. Once you learn how to do that, that's where your income and sales can go.
Game changer. It's a game changer.
At to here. That's where you as a company can go from here to here. And I've seen that, I've seen that with, we have a Fortune 500 company that we train, and they do billions of dollars a year. It's a big search engine. Somebody might have heard of them, but billions a year. So they're already doing really well, but how do they get to the next level? It's these type of techniques that we train them to really help them get to that next level. It's all about the science. If you don't understand the science behind it and the psychology behind, think about the best psychologist in the world, or the best doctors, right? Let's just talk about psychologists for a second. They get paid thousands of dollars an hour to listen and ask questions. The best psychologists don't tell you what your problem is. They don't tell you what to do about it. They listen and ask the right questions to get their client to solve their own problem. That's why
it's a very simple approach. I mean, you have to look at it just even when you walk into a doctor's office.
Yeah.
If they don't ask the right diagnostic questions to get to the root and cause of the problem, that's malpractice.
Well, yeah, it's like the doctor coming in and be like, your back hurts? Okay, great. I think you should do this, this, and this, take this drug, and let's have this surgery come in tomorrow. Here you go. That's what most salespeople do. They'll ask a few questions, logical-based questions, and then wait for an opportunity to jump in with their pitch, jump into their solution, and then they wonder why they get rejected and all these objections.
You need to train your buyers on how to make better decisions.
Yeah.
And where they're getting their information. I spent a lot of time training sales teams similar to how you train them. And that's why I'm so excited about having you on this episode, because there's a lot of principles on a new model of selling. Mm-hmm. Can you tell listeners a little bit more about why those principles and what are they and how can they develop the right skill set?
Yeah, so there's five principles of the new model of selling if they want to write this down. Principle number 1 is learning how to become a problem finder and problem solver, okay? Right. So most salespeople, most companies, we call them product pushers. Now that's no offense, but just as well as I do, when you started, training with your first company, they gave you a slick all about the features and benefits of the product, right? They're what are called product pushers, okay? Mm-hmm. So we teach salespeople how to become problem finders and problem solvers, because in our day and age, it's not enough to just solve problems. Like you always read in books like, oh, you've got to become a problem solver. Hey, it makes complete sense, right? But you now have to be even better at problem finding. Now, what does that mean? What does becoming a problem finder mean? It means being able to ask the right questions that uncover, like we just talked about, certain challenges and problems that your prospect might not even know they have. Or maybe they know about the problem, but they don't know the extent of what it could do to them in the future, right? And if you can't help them uncover their own problems in their mind, it's impossible for them to buy from you so you can actually solve their problems.
Right. And you failed your buyer. And you completely failed.
When salespeople say, oh, buyers are liars, that just really irks me. Buyers only lie because there's certain things you did when you were communicating with them where they didn't trust you. And so they didn't open up to you and they lied to you. That can change. You can make people authentic. You can make them trust you. Now, most salespeople, like I said, are product pushers. They ask a few logical based questions, then they go into pitch mode. And that's like taking a bucket of mud, throwing it up against the wall, hoping and praying that something we're going to say is going to trigger that person to want to buy from us. And I call that hopium. Mm-hmm. It's a drug that so many salespeople are on, where they just hope and pray something they're going to say is going to magically make that person want to buy from them. And it's such a hard and unpredictable way to grow a company or to make a living in sales. Like, it doesn't work. So that's principle number 1. Principle number 2 is asking the right questions at the right time. We've talked about that.
Yes.
Principle number 3 is really listening to what they mean, not just what they're saying. Now, what does that mean? Most salespeople have what I call selective listening. All they do is they listen for a break in the conversation to be able to interject with their solution. Oh, yeah, let me tell you about this part of our product. It's going to do this, this, and this. That's all they do. It's selective listening. It has to be real listening. Like, have you ever, let me give you an example. Let's say that you're sitting at a restaurant and you're talking to your friend about something really important that's happening to you in your life. And all of a sudden a waitress or waiter walks by and they, while you're talking, look at the waiter or waitress. How does that make you feel?
It doesn't make you feel good at all. It makes you feel like you're unimportant, whatever you're saying.
Exactly. Or, you're talking to a friend or whatever about something important. They get a text message and they start looking at the text. I mean, that's selective.
People are distracted. Yeah. People are distracted nowadays, completely distracted. That's why trying to focus on how can I remain present at all times and whatever you're working on is very difficult. But go ahead and finish. What you're saying is gold.
Yeah. And it's selective listening. So I mean, like, real listening, like, and not listening to just listen, but listen to what are they meaning, not just what they're saying. So if they say, I can't afford it, what does that mean? You don't really know what that means, because that can mean different things to different people, right? So you have to ask what are called clarifying questions to find out what's behind that. Principle number 4, we call that feeding back what they said they want to change, and commitment. We don't teach closing skills here. We teach commitment skills. So we're asking the right
like that.
commitment questions to get them to commit to take the next step to solve their problem and buy their solution. I don't like the word closing. I just think it's overused. I don't care if anybody uses it, but we're all about asking the right commitment questions to get them to commit to take the next step, purchase your solution. And then 5 really is a really important one, and that's eliminating sales pressure. Because when we're talking to prospects, if you're being extremely pushy and aggressive, it triggers what's called sales resistance.
Yes.
In today's buyer. And the buyer will do one of 2 things. And I want your listeners to watch this as they go out and sell after they listen to this today. Your buyer's going to do one of 2 things. It's just human psychology. They're either going to A, get defensive, throw out objections, reject what you're offering. A lot of A-type personalities will do that. Or they're going to say things like this: "Oh, that's really nice. Can you leave me some information? Maybe we can set up another appointment in a month or 2. We're very interested. I need to talk to my spouse. Can you call me back in a week, a month, a year later?" And then they go into witness protection mode. And when you call them back, they don't answer. You leave a message, they don't return your call. You send them an email, they don't respond. Right. So one of 2 things happen when you have sales pressure. So what we teach is how to use what's called neutral language that's not negative or too positive, too salesy, that get them to open up to your ideas or your way of thinking. So those are the 5 principles of the new model of selling, if that helps.
I hope everyone listened to that and paid attention to everything that Jeremy's just sharing with you. He's sharing with you nothing but gold. And it's every approach that I have to retrain companies with, Jeremy, because the whole thing right now is when people show up for an appointment where they go and enroll into a program or start the buying process and they're interested about a company, what's happening right now is inside their brain, their fight or flight's going off.
Yeah, 100%.
And all they need to understand is that when they show up for their first appointment or their first sales encounter, you want them to drop their guard and realize that you're there to help them and not judge them.
Yeah. Yeah. You're there to see if you can help them solve their problems. You're not just there to stuff your solution down their throat.
And the hopium you talked about just for a second. What is the best rehab, like dialogue framework for that?
Yeah, it's learning certain questions to ask, because you will have 100% confidence once you learn the right questions. In our framework, we show you how to ask what are called connecting questions that put the focus on them and off of you. You learn how to ask situation questions that find out their present situation. You learn how to ask what are called problem awareness questions to find out what their problems are and why they have those problems, and most importantly, what those problems are doing to them personally.
Right.
Emotion comes out. Most salespeople never get to that level of questionability where people can open up because they don't know how to ask those questions to have the person want to open up. Right. So that's what we show you how to do. Solution awareness questions that basically find out what they've done in the past to solve the problem. Consequence questions. What are the potential consequences or ramifications if they don't do anything about solving the problem? And then really commitment questions that get them committed to take the next step to either have the next meeting, if it's more of a complex sale, to further discovery, or to purchase what you're offering. So that dialogue framework is extremely important. And if you do it the right way, your objections are really 80-90% eliminated.
Objections are a complete reflection on how well you've done your job as a salesperson. Completely.
Any sales trainer that says, and mark my words, if you ever hear a sales trainer say these words, run the other way. If they say the more objections you get, that means they're more interested. That is completely bullshit. I want you to think about it. The easiest sales you've ever made didn't have objections, right?
None.
So you're telling me that the more objections a person has, the more interested they are? Nothing could be further from the truth. The more objections they have, the more they're trying to get rid of you.
Exactly.
That's just human psychology. So that's just a lazy way for a sales trainer to say basically what they're training you doesn't really work that way.
Exactly. And you get a lot of it. I mean, I've had sales trainers come into my old workplace years ago before I branched out on my own, and they would try to sell me their new approach that is bulletproof. And I'm like, listen, I'm not going to no offense, but I got my own thing going on here, and sales isn't a game to me. It's all about connection.
Yeah.
And I always find a way of being able to break through someone's emotional barriers to get to their emotional baggage, to re-anchor those types of beliefs or emotions or whatever it is, for me to help them figure out what is the best possible way for them to move or take action on.
Yeah.
That's all it's about. I mean, let's talk about the biggest objection out there today, coronavirus. Right. How would you go about handling that type of objection?
Well, it depends on what industry you're in. There's obviously going to be different things with different industries that we train, because they're asking us the same question. Really, it's we'd have to get more specific depending on the industry, but it's really asking, there's three parts of helping a person overcome their own objection. I don't like to say, objection handling. I call it more of like helping the person overcome their own concern in their own mind.
It's good.
What we call that is, first of all, we have to clarify, what does the objection even mean? So when they throw out an objection, like, what does that actually mean? Like, what's behind that? We then want to discuss that as like a friend discussing it with a friend. Like, we're looking for a common solution because we're on the same team. And then we want to ask what are called diffusing questions, with lead-in statements like, John, can I suggest something? Yeah, sure. Go ahead. What if it wasn't what you thought it was? And what if you could do it this way, X, Y, Z, whatever you're selling? Would that help you? Different things like that. We call them diffusing questions. So it depends, like I said, each industry is going to be different about how you respond to that. But, that's probably going to go away in the next 30 days. Anyway.
Of course. I mean, just like everything else in life, it always evolves. It just does what it needs to do at that time. I believe a lot of it is a scarcity tactic, but I believe it's the most exciting time for a online salesperson.
Yeah.
Because everyone's home. Everyone's not doing anything, and they need to be working. It's all about perception.
Yeah. Well, it's 100%. Like, let me give you an example. Like, if we got that objection in our sales training company, we would just simply say, yeah, that's, let's say, oh, let's get back together in a month or so when the Corona thing is gone or whatever. So yeah, we could definitely do that. Can I make a suggestion before we go? Yeah, sure. Go ahead, Jeremy. Have you ever considered that the top companies right now and top salespeople over the next 30 days are going to have their salespeople really jump into training, so they actually sharpen their saw and they really learn the right skills? So when they come out in 30 days, their sales teams are actually prepared to sell more to make up for lost revenue. Do you think that might help your sales team as well, possibly?
Beautiful.
Just a little question like that.
Just a small question. I hope the listeners paid a very close attention on how Jeremy delivered that with his tonality.
Yeah.
You have to hit their curiosity part of their brain that actually controls like taking in information.
Yeah.
Because then now they're okay. Yeah, I'm open to listen to what Jeremy is telling me.
That question there gets them to think like, oh, I've never thought about it. With the next 30 days, if our salespeople studied 4 hours a day, wow, we could make up for lost revenue in the last 30 days because they never thought about that. That little question gets them to think about the possibility. And then you can further discuss that. And
you can't do that at a peak state. So a lot of these people, they're overly excited about their product or service. It's impossible to be able to use your tonality perfectly, like the way that
I would say it exactly in that tonality. And some people are like, oh, that sounds boring. Well, I hate to tell you, the more excited you are when you're talking to a prospect one-on-one, the more it triggers them to feel nervous, because people who are excited are nervous. And that causes you to think like, what's going on behind that? That's just human nature.
There's 3 conversations going on in your brain as you're speaking. There's a point of view conversation, emotional conversation, and egotistical conversation. Mm-hmm. When you develop enough emotional intelligence to understand those 3 conversations going on in your customer's brain as you're speaking, you can become extremely powerful.
100%.
Because you're not there to manipulate or persuade. What you're there to do is to understand and how to help.
Yeah, because in our sales training company, we understand that we can solve their problems. If their salespeople start going through the training in the next 30 days, they're going to sell 3 to 4 times more when they start back in 30 days. If they don't, their sales are going to be worse.
Exactly.
Because when they get out of here in 30 days, the companies or people they're selling to are going to be more skeptical. They're going to be more cautious. They're going to hold on to their money a little bit more because of what just happened. So if you use the same sales skills before, you're not even going to get the same results 30, 45 days later when all this goes away.
I would love to have this conversation on another episode as well and breaking this out, because this is what usually happens, listeners, when Jeremy and I get on the phone or get face to face and have a conversation. The conversation could go hours and hours and hours, because this is what we do. And I know you have a lot to do today, and so vice versa. But let me ask you one question. I know the listeners are going to really want to know this.
Yeah.
What are 3 things that you know now, Jeremy, that you wish you knew much earlier in your path to success?
First thing would be, I wish that I would have, and I realized this probably after about a year into it, I wish that I would have known from the very start how to use human behavior to my advantage rather than using sales techniques that work against human behavior. Most sales trainers are still using techniques that literally work against human behavior, that cause sales resistance. And people throw up a wall, and then you have to try to overcome the objections. And like, it's such a stressful and hard way to make a living. So that first year of my sales life could have been very simple had I learned that skill. The second thing I would have, wish I would have done better is, even about 10 years ago, there was a couple years where I didn't really progress much. Like, I felt like, oh, I was already making, at that point 10 years ago, I was making well over $1 million a year in straight commission at my sales job. So I was like, I'm the best in the industry. Like, there's nobody even
here.
What I'm doing. Like, I can't learn anymore. Like, I've arrived. And for the next couple of years, my income stayed the same. Like, it didn't go up. It didn't improve, and my sales just stayed the same. And I realized that I had to let go of my ego and learn from other people. Right. Even if that person was, the person I'm learning from, like 90% of it was just yuck or crap, there was always some golden nuggets I could read in a book or a training that I could use in my sales process to make me better. And that took me from making about 1.2 million a year to about 2.4 million a year as a salesperson. That's a W-2 employee. That like doubled my income. So I wish I would have let go of my ego. I see so many salespeople, even salespeople that make 80 grand or 150 grand that have a year
caught up into it,
massive egos and think they've arrived. And I'm like, dude, you're not understanding. Like, you could make 5 times more of that in selling the same thing if you let go of your ego and learned new skills. You really could. So let go of your ego and your income will always increase. That's
always
a big thing for me.
It comes with the more knowledge that I take in, is the more money that I'll end up producing, Jeremy. Yeah. But it's the right information. I don't need to read a whole book. I can probably read one page over 100 times to get more out of certain books, because I don't want to be influenced by someone else's thoughts.
Yeah.
I just don't, because I've gotten to the point in my life, I've read over, 40 to 50 books a month, a year.
Yeah.
In that year just spanned, that's a lot of information. Do I take in everything? Absolutely not. Yeah. I'm looking for explicit knowledge.
Exactly.
Like snippets. Okay, I can take that and tweak it and make it my own. So that way I'm able to perfect my approach more.
I agree. The last thing I would say I wished I learned earlier is how to work smarter and not harder. The first 3 or 4 years, I'm like knocking doors all the time, doing all this stuff. If I had realized that I could have easily got more referrals, picked up the phone, it would have made it a lot easier. So learn how to work smarter and not harder for sure is a big key.
Why do salespeople work like they think they have to work 100 hours a week to be able to make an income?
That's what they're taught by sales trainers. They're taught the hustle muscle, and you have to work 14 hours to make any money, dial and smile and dial. All that is just old school, just crap. And look at yourself right now. If you're listening to this, where's all that getting you? Maybe you're making low 6 figures at the most. You could be making 5 times more than that if you learn the right skills, for sure.
Absolutely. How can the listeners find a little bit more information about you? Where can they go and look?
Yeah, they can go to our corporate website. It's www.7, and if you want to put a link in here sometime,
I will.
It's 7thlevelhq.com. So it's the number 7 levelhq.com. So just go to 7thlevelhq.com. That's our corporate website. You'll learn about our methodology. You'll learn about our frameworks, those type of thing. But yeah, you can definitely go there if somebody's looking for something.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I encourage every person that listened all the way to the end of this episode to really take action and try to implement some of the things you heard on today's episode. That's important. When you learn new information, write it down, figure out how you can implement it within your own system, within your sales process to make more of an impact with your buyers. That's what it's all about. When you make more impact with your buyers, great things happen. And that takes trust, and it takes you being able to be in tune with your own emotions and your own emotional baggage that you probably carry and affect your call in a negative way or 100%. Affect your encounter. Jeremy, I appreciate you being on. It really means the world to me. And I had fun. I mean, I know that our conversations can get a little lengthy.
I could have gone another hour with you, but I know you've got other appointments. I've got some hard stops. So it's always a pleasure. I'll be on your show anytime you want. We'll have it.
Sounds great. Yeah, we're going to have to further this conversation. I'm sure the listeners will be sitting in. We have a feedback form in which they fill out, and they share a lot of their, what they're going through and some of the maybe bottlenecks that they're having. But other than that, you have an amazing day, everybody. Y'all take care.
Thanks, Chris. Appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
Always. Keep moving, keep growing, keep learning. Take care.
Now, if you're serious about joining the top 1%, I mean the top 1%, and you want to experience more training content just like this, click the links right over there. Right over there, they're exactly what you need to see next. You see, I release new episodes featuring top salespeople and sales authorities, multiple six-figure, high six-figure, even seven-figure earners. And if you're new here, do yourself a favor and smash that subscribe button right below, and join our new Facebook group, Sales Revolution. You see, it's free, and there's a link in the description below just for you. We put it there for you. Finally, I make posts on Facebook and Instagram each and every day with more tips and training. So be sure and follow me and turn on your notifications. So make a comment in the first 7 minutes to any of my latest posts, share this episode, and there's a very real chance that you're going to win some killer prizes. And here's the thing. Don't sit on the sidelines. Don't be like everyone else. Get into the game. Join the sales revolution. Stay active. Get involved. Learn the right skills, and we will show you how to take your life and income to a level that most only dream about.